Well, good morning, Burwood Church. Good morning. It is good to be with you this morning. I don't think I've spoken in Burwood Church since the lockdown days when I had to record a video for you guys, but it's good to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeremy and I work as an associate pastor, youth pastor at Nunawading Church, and then I also lead a church plant as well called Avenue as well. So it's good to be here with a lot of familiar faces that I know, and I'm excited to share a word with you today. I've realized that when it comes to life, there are two groups of people in this world. There are those who are respected, and there are those who are loved. There are those who are respected and those who are loved. And I thought about this framework when I was in a little university in New South Wales for one semester called Avondale University. And for those of you who don't know what Avondale is, it's a very small university, very intimate, like lots of it's a very different university environment to your typical university that you might be used to. And I was this fresh kid on the block, but I was also a fourth year student as well. So I was coming into a first year environment with like fourth year energy. And I was trying to make sense of the whole dynamics at Avondale, and I was trying to find my place in all of it. It felt like I was going back to school again and trying to figure out how I fit in to the context of Avondale. And then a few of my friends came up at the end of my studies in Avondale when I was graduating. Lionel was one of those people who came up, and they asked me how things were going in Avondale, how it was working, how I was finding it, and I said, like, in Avondale, I think I am respected, but I'm not loved. I think I'm respected, but I'm not loved in Avondale. And you can probably think about this same framework when it comes to your social settings. You'll see that there are people who are respected. So these are the people who are admired. They are looked upon from a distance, but you don't feel very close to them. They feel like they're over there, but you don't feel like you're close with them. But then you have people who are very loved. And these people are people who are okay with showing their flaws. They're okay with being really authentic, really real, and they're very okay with showing their imperfections. But the problem about that is sometimes people who are highly warm but not respected, they might be taken not too seriously. Whereas people who are respected but not loved may not feel like they're real or they're authentic or you see the real version of them. And I thought I was making this whole concept up until I started researching, and I started looking into this communication coach called Vanessa Van Edwards, and she was talking about the traits of charisma, what makes a charismatic person. And she said that there were two things that comes to making a charismatic person. The first thing about a charismatic person is they are highly competent. And then another trait of a highly charismatic person as well is that they are highly warm. So when you have the blend of both warmth and competence together, that creates charisma. Warmth meaning loved, and competent meaning respected. And it made me think about how God communicates with us. How he reveals himself to us. Does he err on the side of competence, or does he err on the side of warmth? Does he come with power, with majesty, with glory, and we are admired by him? Or does he come to us in a way of warmth, where he comes close to us, where he comes near to us and displays a gentleness and a meekness to us? Because highly competent people without warmth makes you respected but distant. But high warmth without competence makes you loved but dismissed. And I want to suggest that God holds the balance of these two in perfect tension. And today we're going to look at a passage where we look at the character of Elijah. And thank you, Reese. That was an amazing children's story that sets the scene so perfectly. Elijah is probably the most well-known prophet in the Bible, and his life and his ministry, in all of that, he learnt the picture of God. He learnt to understand who God truly was, the multifaceted nature of God, being both this sovereign God, but this God who was close. And for a bit of context, Elijah has seen God work in miraculous ways before we get into this story. Before we get into this text where we see how God reveals himself to Elijah, just before this, God has shown up in a dramatic way to Elijah. Elijah has just gone through 3 years of famine where there has been no rain because he prophesied that to the king Ahab, who was a terrible king. And he said, because of your wickedness, there will be 3 years of no rain and there'll be 3 years of famine. But then that famine is marked with an end when Elijah has a contest with the king on Mount Carmel. So they go onto this mountain and there's this contest between the prophets of Baal and Elijah. And Elijah says, whoever sends fire from heaven is the true God. If Baal sends fire from heaven, then he is the true God. But if our God Yahweh sends fire from heaven, then he is the true God. And what happens in that story is Elijah is there and fire falls down from heaven. It consumes the offering. Elijah witnesses a miraculous thing happen, something that you cannot put down to science, but it's purely a miracle. And then rain begins to fall from heaven after 3 years of no rain. And you would have thought that Elijah would be feeling on top of the world in this moment, extremely victorious. But then what we see in this story is Elijah hits a state of depression. He gets extremely sad and depressed. And this is where we pick up the story. It says, now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. While he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. Look around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went to a cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? I've read this story many times, and every time I read it, there is this question that comes to mind for me. What is wrong with Elijah? Or what more does Elijah need to know that God is there for him? God is real, that he is for him and not against him. What more does Elijah need? You see, Elijah is experiencing the kind of miracles that we dream of experiencing. Seeing fire fall from heaven, seeing the clouds open up after 3 years of no rain and rain falling from heaven. God has used him powerfully, and he has seen God work powerfully firsthand. But you see, when Elijah doesn't have the outcome he desires, he feels incredibly depressed and sad, because even though he has seen these miraculous things happen, even though he's seen God work mightily, the outcome hasn't been what he had hoped for. You see, the nation of Israel hadn't turned back to Yahweh. Ahab and Jezebel hadn't repented. In fact, they're hunting him down now. He hadn't made the difference he hoped he would make. God has done the impossible, has shown himself to be sovereign above all things, and even then, it hasn't worked the way that Elijah hoped it would, and no wonder Elijah is depressed. See, many of us, we base our faith on our signs and circumstances that happen in our life. We're trying to live from one high to the next. That feeling I once had, if only I can get that feeling back. And we do that with our spiritual experience as well. We go from one church service to one church service trying to get that next spiritual high. We go to one conference to another conference to try and get that next spiritual kick. But when you think about it, when we're going about our spirituality in that way, it's really no different to what the world offers in terms of that dopamine fix that we're trying to get. We're just tailoring that in a spiritual way. You see, God is calling us to a faith that runs deeper than simply chasing after the fleeting spiritual highs of the moment. Because what we see with Elijah's life is that he falls into this state of resentment. He builds up this resentment towards life, towards ministry, and towards God. And you can imagine what he's thinking. God, I've served you faithfully all alone, all by myself, and this is what I get. This is how you treat me after everything I have done for you. You see, pride's probably building up in Elijah's life. He's probably wondering what is going on. He's probably wondering why he is experiencing what he's experiencing. And he's saying, God, I don't deserve this. Elijah had come to live his life in the realm of the spectacular, from one spiritual high to the next, from one dramatic experience to the next. But living this way has left Elijah high and dry. It's left him unsatisfied. But the reality is I get that as well. I understand where Elijah's coming from. I resonate with Elijah. Because in my life right now, I really believe that I am living in the prayers that I have prayed so long ago. I really believe that I have prayed prayers years ago, and I get to live in the experience of those prayers right now. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, just recently, I've been living off a bit of a spiritual high myself. I've been seeing God work in powerful, miraculous ways. I have seen people's lives change, going from not knowing God to experiencing and being completely transformed by Jesus. In fact, one of my friends, Spencer, who's here today, had such an amazing experience where he saw God completely transform his life, completely turn his life around. And I got to be a part of that. I got to see God work powerfully through him. And I have no doubt that God was in that. I get to be a part of a church that I had the opportunity to start. And I prayed one day in 2015, I wrote it down in my journal, God, I pray that you would use me one day to start a church. And I get to live in that now. I get to experience that now. I get to live in the fruit of that now. I prayed that one day I would be a part of a church that would write its own songs, and I get to experience that. I get to live that out now. We got to have a showcase of some original songs, and that was such a powerful experience. I had no doubt that God was in that. And then recently I got to hang out and do an amazing podcast with my faith hero, and who I think is like the church planning goat. And I got to hang out with him and do a podcast with him, and that was so awesome. And I thought, I'd be over the moon with all these amazing, amazing experiences of God just showing up, and God, just answering the prayers that I had prayed so long ago. But if I'm honest with you, pretty much the next week, I fell into a state of resentment, just like Elijah. Instead of being grateful for the things that I got to experience, the adventure that God was taking me on, I started to feel resentment. I started to think about the things I didn't have. I started to get frustrated with people for not doing the things I hoped that they would do. I started getting frustrated with the nature of the circumstances because the nature of the circumstances weren't going the way that I hoped. When we start living off spiritual highs, normal life starts to feel like a letdown. We start expecting God to perform rather than just learning to abide with him, just learning to live with him. I think God had begun to show me a different way of faith, the same way he showed Elijah. The text is extremely rich, this text that we're reading, and I want to draw out some things for you. It says that Elijah went into a cave. Now, what I'm going to get you to do now is get out a pen, get your Bible out, and what I want you to do is I want you to cross out a word in the Bible and change the Bible. Sounds really bad, but when you look at it in the Hebrew, it's something really interesting that pops up. When we read it in the English, it says a cave, so it's using the indefinite article there. But then when you look at it in the original language, what you have is this word here. Can you turn to your neighbor and can you say ha? Ha. Sounds like you're laughing now. Ha. Ha. Yes. Ha is the word that is used just before the word cave in the original language. And the word ha means the. It's using the definite article here. The definite article. So in fact, when we read this text, we shouldn't be reading it as a cave. We should be reading it as the cave. The cave. So what that means is it's pointing to a specific kind of cave. And what is this cave that is being referred to here? Well, we know that Elijah is on Mount Sinai. He is on the top of Mount Sinai, and Mount Sinai is quite significant for the Israelites. It's quite significant in the Hebrew Bible because what happened on Mount Sinai was it was a very sacred mountain. And because it was on this mountain that God revealed himself to Moses, he showed his glory to Moses. And Moses witnessed the splendor of God in such a majestic and powerful way. Here's a text. Moses goes onto the mountain, this same mountain that Elijah is on, and it says, "Then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I'll put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." The cleft of the rock, or the cave Moses was hidden in, is probably the same cave that Moses was in. That cleft of the rock that God hid Moses in is probably, potentially, the same cave that Elijah is being hidden in. Why is this significant? I believe Elijah is probably hoping for an experience like Moses. He knew the story. He knew what Moses got to experience. He knew that Moses got to see the glory of God shine before him. And he's probably coming into this cave, he's probably coming into this mountain and hoping, maybe I can get an experience like Moses. I've just had this awesome spiritual high where I've seen God pour out his fire from heaven, but now I'm feeling like depressed. And maybe if I get another experience, an experience like Moses, maybe that would be enough. But then God, he shows Elijah that he doesn't always move in the realm of the extraordinary and the dramatic. Because Elijah says there he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Elijah's probably thinking, finally, this is it. I'm going to get the experience like Moses again. But then a great and a powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword, and I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." So you notice that God speaks to Moses, to Elijah. He says the same thing twice. He says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He was trying to speak to Elijah in the cave with that voice. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" But Elijah didn't think that this was enough. He was wanting something supernatural. He was hoping for another dramatic experience. So God, he ministers to Elijah by saying, "Look, Elijah, let me show you something. Let me show you something about how you are to live out your faith, how you are to have a relationship with me. So he puts him on the mountain. And all these physical phenomena were known to be precursors of God's coming. These winds, these earthquakes and fires, we see it in the Bible. It's like Avatar, the Last Airbender sort of stuff. Winds, earthquakes, fires, these were precursors to the coming of God. We see in the Bible a lot of the times like God would reveal himself after these dramatic revelations through winds, earth, and fires. And you can imagine Elijah, his gripping his seat and his thinking, finally I get to experience what Moses experienced. Then something very anticlimactic happens. That same voice that he heard before speaks again. Those same words he heard before get spoken again. Those words, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I want to link back to what I was saying at the start. God is a charismatic God who displays competence, power, and majesty. But he is also a God of warmth. He comes near to us. He makes himself vulnerable to us, and he whispers to us. When you hear someone whisper in your life, the only way you can hear that whisper is if you're up close to that person. And that's why God speaks to Elijah in the tender whisper. Because he's trying to show Elijah, yes, I am a God who can do all these majestic, powerful things. I can reveal myself in this way, but I care more about being close to you. I care more about being alongside you, being intimate with you. So he whispers to Elijah. This quote has always stuck with me. It says, perhaps the problem with such displays of power and the reason God patently refrains from speaking in such ways most of the time is that they belie the fundamental gentleness and intimacy of his heart. Dramatic revelations impress for sure, but they can also intimidate, dominate, and alienate those on the receiving end. And so, the potentate of time, creator of the rolling spheres, ineffably sublime, chooses to whisper in our ear way more than he shouts from the skies. If we're ever to feel truly safe in the warmth of God, then we must learn to listen to the voice of God in the anti-climax of life's events, in the ordinary, in the mundane. Years ago, about a year ago, I was at a conference, and it was at the end of a conference, and a mentor came up to me and said, "What's in your life, and how can I pray for you?" And I replied, "Look, I'm just kind of bored with my faith and my ministry. I'm doing what I love to do, but it's not exciting me the same way as it used to excite me." And, I expected him to start praying for me. I expected him to start praying against that boredom, to help me to start feeling excited again about doing the thing that I love to do, to renew that youthful passion that I once had, even though I'm still pretty young, but that God would reintroduce that fire, that passion, that excitement that I once had. But you know what? Instead, he started praying into the boring. He prayed that I would become more bored. And it didn't make sense at the time for me, but I think I get it now. A boring faith is not necessarily a bad faith. Just like a boring kind of love is not necessarily a bad kind of love. Because it's the love in the mundane, that is where any relationship is won and lost. It's won and lost in the mundane, in the ordinary, in the everyday. Tyler Staton, he writes this: "Love is easy at the first and at the last. It's effortless in the honeymoon stage when you're infatuated with each other, touchy, talkative, and smitten. And love is like breathing for the old couple who has decades into a mature love that has been aged to perfection like a fine wine. But all those years in between, love in the midst of building a career, raising kids, establishing a life, and facing trials, those are the long years when love has to be worked at and fought for. These are the years when early infatuation is matured into the old couple in effortless union. Those are the years when love is won and lost. Like love, prayer comes easy at the first and at the last for sinners and saints. But all those years in between, those are the important ones. Prayer is about relationship, and that means fidelity is the only container within which it can truly flourish. See, boring beats brilliance every single time. Because boring, it's not always exciting, it's not always fancy, it's not always exhilarating. And for someone like me who loves adrenaline, I live off risk and adrenaline and the highs, it doesn't have that. But what boring is boring is consistent. Boring is consistent. And consistency builds any kind of relationship. Consistency is how we learn the heart of God and become captivated with his wonder all over again. That is how we build a relationship with God that is meaningful, that is lasting, that is fruitful, and will endure for ages to come. By having that boring kind of faith, to be having like a humble kind of obedience to what God is calling you to do. To listening to those small little promptings, those small little whispers, and showing up and being obedient. You see, Jesus, he could have revealed his glory to us in many different ways. He could have shown himself to us in a pillar of cloud, as he has done. He could have shown himself to us by splitting open the rocks, as he has done. He could have shown himself to us through great winds, as he has done. He could have shown up to us through sending fire from heaven, as he has done. But instead, he does so on a cross. He reveals himself in the humblest and the meekest kind of way known to man. On a cross, God, Jesus, he made himself completely vulnerable, completely exposed, showing that he is not just a God who is powerful, who is competent, who can do anything we could ever imagine, but he is also a God who wants to be close with us. He is a God who is not afraid in making himself vulnerable to us and showing us who he truly is. The greatest display of God's glory was not found in dramatic revelations of supernatural phenomena, but it was done on a criminal's cross. Through that cross, we now know who God is. He is a God who can show himself in majestic and splendorous ways. But this God that we know, he prefers, I think, to whisper to our heart. He's a God who doesn't simply just want to intimidate us with these crazy signs and crazy wonders, but he is a God who wants to be intimate. God who does not want to intimidate, but a God who wants to be intimate. And perhaps God is whispering to your heart today. He is saying, what are you doing here? He's whispering to your heart. He's not showing up in supernatural revelations or miraculous ways, but he is trying to teach you a simple heart, a simple faith, the faith of listening to those little promptings that he is putting on your heart. And the question for you is, are you going to respond to that? Or are you going to chase after the next fix, that next spiritual high? Are you basing your faith on the moment? Or are you walking with Jesus every single day? Are you being faithful? Are you listening to that whisper of God?